Welcome back to Faith Through Lockdown. We're exploring what faith looks like when no one else is watching, when our church buildings are closed, when we can't gather together as youth groups, when you can't even hang out with your friends easily. How do you continue to grow as a disciple and as a follower of Jesus? Each week we have been diving into the Bible, we've been discussing stuff in groups, and we've also been looking at some really practical tips and practical ways that you can challenge yourself to do some of these things. This week is part 4, and we're going to be thinking all about worship. I'm not sure how used to church each of you are. Maybe for you, church is something that you've always grown up going to. Maybe it's something that you haven't really ever been anywhere near. But I'll tell you one thing, you don't have to go very near a church to find out that singing is something that is really important to churches. Christ alone, cornerstone, cornerstone. And what's even weirder is we don't even call it singing, we call it worship. Like, if you're new to church, how weird is that? That loads of people sing and they don't even call it singing, we call it worship. Like, what is that about? So the word worship, it comes from the English root of the word, which is worthship. Worthship. So if we truly believe that God is the creator of the world, the creator of the universe, the creator of me, the one who knows me, who loves me, who made a way for me to come back into relationship with him. If God is all of those things, then he is worthy of our praises and our adoration. I wonder what you worship in your life. What is it that you give devotion to? What is it you give attention to? There will be things that you adore. There will be things that you give value to, that you praise, that you commend, that you give your attention and your time to. And it's the same with God. If God is all of those things, then surely he is worth our attention. He is worth our time. He is worthy of our praises and our adoration. And that, in essence, is what worship is all about. It is declaring the goodness of God. It is praising God for who he is and what he has done for us. But for many of us, singing songs of worship in church is so much more than that. It's about drawing close to God. It's about climbing into the Father's lap. It's about a time of intimacy. It's about forgetting everything else that's going on in the world and just focusing on God. It is a time to invite the Spirit to move in and through us. There is a reason that we sing all of these really repetitive songs in worship. I think that part of that reason is sometimes so that we cannot be distracted even by the words we are singing. By singing the same words over and over again, it allows us to forget the world around us and go deeper and deeper with God. We began this series by really examining closely the person of Jesus. We looked at what he said and what he did and how he lived life. In John chapter 4, there's this incredible encounter where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at a well in the middle of the day. If you've not read this part of the Bible, I want to encourage you to go and read John chapter 4. It is a remarkable story. But midway through this encounter, they sort of get in a disagreement over worship. And so here is what Jesus says. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. In this passage, Jesus is talking about how we should worship. It is not just about singing songs and going through the motions. When we sing songs and praises to God, there is something about our attitude that needs to be right. When we worship together, when we sing songs of praises to God, we are aligning ourselves to the Father's Spirit. It's a little bit like one of those old-fashioned radios where you had to turn a dial to tune to the right frequency. It's sometimes a bit like that with our worship. We are aligning our spirit with the Holy Spirit. We're inviting God in to move in our hearts. We are asking God to draw close. It's this moment of intimacy, this glimpse of heaven when we say, Holy Spirit, come. And I know that loads of you watching this will know exactly what I am talking about. Maybe you have encountered God in the worship at youth or at church. Or maybe as I've been talking about this, your mind has been drawn back to an encounter with the Holy Spirit that you had at a bigger worship event, something like Soul Survivor or New Wine. Worship is one of the key ways in which we connect with God. And for many of us, I know that it plays a significant part in the story of our journey of coming to faith. That was certainly true of my faith journey. When I think back to when I first became a Christian, I'm drawn back to this encounter with the Holy Spirit I had at a large worship event at the age of 11. And from that point onwards, I look back over my teenage years particularly, and I can pinpoint moments where I engaged with God in the worship, where I felt His Spirit move and I really drew close and felt God speak to me. So now that the church building is closed, there's no residential, there's no weekend away, there's no summer festivals. What now? Where do we go from here? Well, I was really drawn to this passage in 1 Kings. It says this: "Then he said, 'Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks into pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice." For many of us that have encountered God, have had encounters with the Holy Spirit in those large worship gatherings, it's hard to imagine any other way is possible. Maybe for some of you, in comparison to the worship experience at something like Soul Survivor, you struggle to worship at church, let alone at home on your own. But I want to really encourage you that God so often speaks to us in the still, small voice. When I think about those times that I really drew close to God in worship, when I think about the times when I really felt like God spoke to me, often it was me allowing God in. And those great big worship events really helped me to encounter God. In the same way singing songs at church help us to engage with God, the problem isn't God, the problem is us. And so often I think I was the barrier to allowing God in. Let me tell you about when I first started to lead worship songs on guitar. In the very beginning, I wasn't very good. And so I didn't really want to play worship songs in front of people. However, what that did mean is I spent many nights in my room with the door closed, just me and my guitar worshipping God. And for me, this was one of those penny drop moments when I realised that God spoke in the still small voice. I found that the Holy Spirit met with me in my bedroom with just me and a guitar. I realised what this verse meant. And so although it may sound weird, we can still worship on our own in our room. At the real heart of what worship is all about is drawing close into the presence of God. So we're going to dive into discussion groups. We are going to talk about worship. We're going to look at these 2 Bible passages. If there's one thing I could encourage you to do this week, is to go into your room, is to close the door, grab a pair of headphones, stick on a worship playlist, and just listen for that still, small voice.